Hey guys, what's going on? It's Uncle Tone. How you guys doing? Welcome to Bicycling 101 Part 2. How you guys doing? In last week's video, I showed you how to install a new set of wheels on your bike. In this week's episode for Part 2, I'm going to show you how to spiffy up your old tired drivetrain and install a new cassette, new chain rings, and a new chain. Cool beans. I'm going to be setting up my bike as a 1x10, which means I will have one chain ring here in the front. We're going to remove all three of these and get rid of them, do whatever you want with them, sell them for beer money, whatever you want, and replace it with one chain ring here on the front, which we're going to use a race face ring for, and then we're going to replace the 10-speed cassette here on the rear wheel with a new one, and then I'll show you how to install a new chain as well. Cool beans. So first off, we're going to start with the rear wheel and the rear cassette. So here we are with our rear wheel. We're going to do is go ahead and remove this old cassette so we can install a new one. In order to do this, we're going to need a couple of tools. You're going to need one, a lock ring tool. This one's made by Park Tool. This is the tool that turns this lock ring on the cassette to remove and install the cassette. It holds the cassette on to the free hub body. So there you go, which allows it to spin and freewheel and so on and so forth. You're also going to need a chain whip. I made my own chain whip out of a length of chain and a pair of vice grips. Or you can go to the bike shop and buy one if you want. They're going to run you about $20-25. It's not a tool you're going to use a lot, so there you go. You're also going to need your quick release. Take the springs off of it and insert it into the back there. Install your lock ring tool and then use the end of your quick release tool, or your quick release. Tighten that back down on here. Don't put it on super tight because this is going to loosen. Just tight enough to hold that lock ring tool in place while you go ahead and remove the cassette. So fix this because it came undone on me. Cool beans. Then just wrap your chain whip around your cassette like so, and you're going to use that to hold this in place and prevent it from turning while you go ahead and use your lock ring tool to go ahead and remove your cassette like so. Alright, so once you've removed your old cassette, you're ready to go ahead and install your new one. You will notice here on the free hub body that there are splines here on this free hub body. One of them is going to be wider than all of the rest of them right there. That is going to line up with your new cassette. Will also have splines on the inside, and one of those will be wider than all of the other ones, which as you can see is right here. That's going to line up with the wider section on the free hub body. So you're going to take those and line them up. This is, for the record, a Shimano SLX 10-speed cassette, in case you guys are wondering what I'm using. And you're going to go ahead and line up those splines like so and slide your new cassette onto the free hub body. One of you mentioned in last week's video that you were curious how this attaches to the wheel. Gemma just came in case you guys are wondering. This free hub body is actually attached to the wheel via, hello Fiora, a 8mm bolt that attaches to the axle itself. So there you go. Go ahead, line up those splines and slide that on. I'm shooting video, I'll be there in a second, honey. And slide that on. I'm shooting video, honey, I'll be there in a second. And once you get that all installed, you can go ahead, slip the lock ring on and tighten it down. So once you get them all lined up, you can go ahead and install your lock ring onto it, and then use your lock ring tool that I showed you in the previous video to tighten the lock ring down, and then you are all done. Make sure if you are using a 9 or 10 speed cassette that you use the spacer included with your wheels. 11 speed, most new wheels now are 11 speed compatible. The free hub body on an 11 speed cassette is actually a little bit wider than at 9 or 10 speed. So you're going to want to make sure that you use that spacer so that your cassette fits properly. Then go ahead, slip your lock ring tool on. You don't need to use the other chain whip thing for this because you're tightening, not loosening. Hold it in place and just gently tighten it down. Snug. It needs to be snug, but not insanely tight. Just like so. There you go. Cool beans. That is how you install a new cassette onto your bike. Now we'll move on to the crankset. Alright, cool beans. Now we are going to go ahead and move on to the crankset. There are two basic types of cranksets. A traditional bottom bracket spindle. I'm going to pick up the camera here for a second. A traditional bottom bracket spindle, like so, that the crank arm is pressed onto, or the different system which houses the bottom bracket bearings outside of the bottom bracket in some like cups that are on the outside of the bottom bracket, and then the spindle is actually attached to the crank arm itself. It's one big giant long spindle that runs right through the center of the bottom bracket out the other side and clamps down onto the left side crank arm. That's mostly a Shimano type system. In order to remove that, you're going to see two bolts here on the end of the left side crank arm. You're going to loosen those off, and then the crank arm will pull off. Be careful not to drop any spacers or anything like that. And then using a cloth to cover the spindle, or a rubber mallet or something like that, give it a few taps like that, and you will loosen off the spindle from inside. And then you can just grab a hold of the crank arm itself and pull it right out of the bike. The entire bottom bracket spindle will come out. Whereas my system here, which is a Shimano Octolink system, which is very similar to an ISIS drive system, and a traditional bottom bracket uses the spindles attached inside the bottom bracket, and the crank arms press on to the spindle. In order to remove this, you're going to need one of these snazzy dazzy tools right here. This is what's known as a crank puller. If you're going to be doing your own work on your own bike, you really should have one of these, just because, you know, if you try and remove these cranksets without using a crank puller, you're going to mess them up. There's a taper on the bottom bracket of the spindle of about 1 to 2 degrees. And if you mess up that taper, it will never, ever stay tight again, no matter how hard you honk it down. So there you go. You're going to want to make sure that you pull these straight off of the spindle, which is what your crank puller's for. So in order to do that, first we're going to take an 8mm Allen wrench. Well, actually, what we're going to do first is drop the chain off of the crankset, like so. Lay it down on the bottom bracket area of the bike and just get the chain off the crankset so that we don't have that in the way. And then we're going to go ahead and loosen this bolt off so that we can remove the cranks itself. Go ahead and remove this 8mm bolt from the inside of the cranks. This is the bolt that tightens down the cranks and presses them back down onto the spindle. Once you have removed that, you're going to go ahead and you'll notice on your crank puller that one of these ends is threaded. That threads into, make sure it's all the way out first. That threads into the bottom bracket itself. So you're just going to go ahead and thread that in to the bottom bracket until it bottoms out and you can't turn it anymore. It doesn't need to be insanely tight. It just needs to be bottomed out so that you can't turn it anymore, like so. Then you're going to go ahead and take the puller apart, and using an adjustable wrench, like so, go ahead and turn it, and it will pull the crankset directly off of the spindle straight, just like so. There you can see the tapers inside. That is what secures it onto the bottom bracket spindle. Now that you have it off the bike, it's going to be much easier to work on and take these chain rings off and replace them with our other ring. So once you have it off the bike, you can go ahead and remove the crank puller, get that out of the way, and now you can more easily set this crankset down and work on it. First thing you're going to do is remove the small ring. If you're running a triple setup, if you're running a double setup, obviously you're not going to need to remove that, but using a 5mm Allen key, go ahead and loosen these bolts off. These will be very tight, by the way. These bolts tend to be super, super tight. So go ahead and loosen those off. Being very careful not to cut yourself on the chainring teeth because they are very, very sharp. Sometimes it's easier if you set it like this and press down, like so. Sometimes to get a little extra leverage, I will use a pair of vice grips on the end of my adjustable wrench, just to get a little more, or on the end of my Allen key, just to get a little more torque on a longer tool, you know, just makes it a little easier. So there you go. You can go ahead and loosen these bolts off. As you can see, they're quite tight. Alright, so once you've removed all 4 of those bolts, you can simply lift off the small chainring and get rid of it. Since we're not going to be using it, we're not going to need it. So we can go ahead and get rid of that and move on to these middle chainring bolts. These are the ones that I hate. I can't stand these things. This is the part of working on cranksets that I absolutely hate. You're going to have a bit of a time with these. You're going to need one of these wrenches. If you're working on a Shimano crankset, you're going to need one of these. This is a lock ring, or not a lock ring tool, but a chainring nut tool. And what it does basically is holds these chainring nuts on the back of the chainring bolts in place while you loosen the bolts on the front. It's a bit of a nightmare type procedure. I usually cut myself at least once while I'm doing it. I really wish Shimano would dump those things and go to something like DRIVETRAIN does or Avid does, where they have a 5mm or 6mm hex bolt on the outside or on the inside and a 5mm on the inside, and then you can just simply use 2 Allen keys to remove the chainring bolts, which makes things much, much easier. But Shimano still insists on using these stupid lock ring bolts, which are a bit of a nightmare. So there you go. You're going to go ahead and basically what you're going to do is hold these in place with this lock ring tool, or chainring nut tool, while you loosen off the bolt on the other side. So go ahead and do that for all 4 of those bolts. Once you've initially hulked up on them and you've got them loose, you can usually just remove them fairly easily. I had to use my vice grips again and really honk on them to get them to move. These chainring bolts tend to be really, really tight. Normally once you get it loose, you can simply hold the nut on the back with your finger while you unscrew it. So there you go. Go ahead and remove all 4 of them, like so. And then you can take off your middle chainring, as well as the big ring, because we're not going to be using either one of those. And all you are left with is a bare crank arm with no chainring on it. If you're just replacing one ring, or, you know, all 3 of your chain rings or whatever, you can simply go ahead and replace the rings now. The big one goes on the outside of the little niche nook you see there. The middle one goes up against it, and then obviously the small ring screws onto those 4 bolts on the back. I am going with a single ring setup. As you can see here, just 1 ring. The problem you may run into if, like me, you're going with a single ring setup is the chainring bolts from your other crankset may be too long, because they were meant to go through this chainring as well as the middle chainring, so they may end up being too long. So I'm gonna have to pause the video here, head out to the bike shop, and see if they have any single chainring bolt, single ring chainring bolts for like downhill bikes or whatever that run a single ring setup, because these bolts are too long. I have been to the bike shop and I got some shorter chainring bolts. As you can see, the longer ones are from the double ring 2-ring setup that I had on there before, and the new ones are the shorter one here, which is meant for a single ring setup. I should have remembered that before I started working on this, that I was going to need shorter chainring bolts. Kind of dropped the ball on that one and forgot. There you go. Cool beans. So now we can go ahead and attach our chainring to our crankset using these new shorter bolts, which are going to work much, much better than the other ones. The one with the chainring nut tool attaches to goes on the back of the crank arm. The bolt head itself goes on the front. This is the one with the bolt head, goes on the front. Cool beans. Go ahead and attach all of those, and just put them all on finger tight first. Once you get them on finger tight, you can go ahead and use your wrench and your lock ring nut tool, chainring nut tool, to firmly fasten them So once you get them all finger tight, like so, you just go ahead, snug everything up, get it nice and tight on there, and then tighten them down really well using your lock ring nut tool, your chainring nut tool, like so. Place that on there, use that to hold this and get it nice and tight so the chainring isn't going anywhere. Do all 4 bolts like that. Once you have the chainring firmly mounted to the crank, you are ready to go ahead and reinstall it onto your bike. I have to remove my front derailleur first though. Before I remove my front derailleur, I'm going to need to remove the chain from the bike because it threads through the front derailleur. So in order to remove the front derailleur, I'm going to have to break the chain. This is done a couple of different ways. KMC and SRAM use connecting links here that you can take apart. You can see the difference between this connecting link and the links beside it. This one snaps together. Shimano uses a pin type system with pins that go through the chain. I have one of those here as well. I could show you. The first thing we're going to need to do is separate the link on this connecting link and pop it open so that we can remove the chain. I usually just use a pair of ice grips on either side of it where the link connects together, and then you can usually, if you press together, you can usually pop the link open. So, just like so. There you go. We got it to pop open. So now we can remove that, take that connecting link out, and unthread the chain from the, just set this aside because you will reuse it. Set this aside, this connecting link, because you will reuse it when you reattach the chain. And now we can go ahead and remove the front derailleur. Since I'm using a 1x10 setup, I'm not going to need that front derailleur on there since I won't be shifting on the front, so we might as well get rid of that as well as the front shifter. First step to removing your front derailleur is make sure that your shifter is shifted all the way down to the smallest chainring. And then you can reach around here and disconnect the shift cable, which attaches normally on the non-drive side. Go ahead and remove the, loosen off the shifting cable and pull it out of its anchor so that it is not in your way. Cool beans. Underneath the bottom bracket here, you will see there's a chain stop right, or a cable stop right here. This middle cable is the one for the front derailleur, so we're going to go ahead and remove that. You're going to need to remove the end cap that is on the end of that cable there. So go ahead, cut the cable, remove that end cap, and then you can thread that out and remove the shift cable housing that runs all the way up the down tube to the shifter. So in order to remove the front shifter, I'm going to need to move it and the brake lever over so I can remove the grip. And then I'll be able to remove the brake lever and then the shifter. And then I'm going to install new grips. I'm not a huge fan of these grips that came on the bike. These will use probably a 4 and 5 millimeter wrench. The brake lever is usually 5. The shifter is usually 4. Move those over just so that you can get in underneath this grip. Most grips nowadays are bolt-on. This is what I'll be replacing these with. In which case you can just go ahead and loosen the bolts to remove them. This one did not come with bolt-on grips though, so we're going to go ahead and slide something in underneath there just to loosen the grip so we can get it off the bike. I'm using a screwdriver. You can use whatever you want. I used to have an old spoke laying around that I used for this. Doesn't really matter what you use, you just need to loosen it. Sometimes it helps if you squirt a little alcohol in underneath it. Not a huge fan of these grips, so this might take a couple of minutes, but you know, just whatever you need to do to get the grips off, pretty much. We got the grip off. These are not the bolt-on type of grips, but back in the day, before bolt-on grips became a thing, I used to use hairspray to remove and install grips. It works really, really well, and when, as anyone who's used hairspray knows, when it dries, it's sticky. So it's super slippery to install them. Give it a few hours to dry inside the grip, and it would help the grip stick to the handlebar. So back in the day, I used to use hairspray all the time.
now that we have the advent of bolt-on grips like this one, this is an Ergon GP2 grip. I picked these up today at the bike shop. These are my grips of choice, mainly because I have really large hands. So standard regular size grips aren't really comfortable for me. I got the large GP2 grips. I had these on my other bike as well, and they're really, really comfortable. I like them a lot. They are not cheap. These will run you about 40 bucks for grips, which seems ridiculous, but they're awesome. And they're ergonomic. So they sit in your hands like so, and they're just really, really comfortable. And I haven't had any problems with carpal tunnel or anything while using these. So we're gonna go ahead and slide this back on and get the bike set up again. All right, cool beans. We got the front shifter removed since we no longer need it. We got my new grips installed, and we got the bar set up again. Everything looks all awesome. Cool beans. Now that we don't have a front derailleur and all the shift housing and stuff's been removed, we can go ahead and reinstall the cranks. The crank on the other side is going to be straight down, so make sure this one's placed straight up and slide it back on. Check just to make sure that your cranks are actually straight, because, you know, I have seen people accidentally put them on not perfectly straight, which is kind of goofy. There you go. And just press it on like so. It doesn't need to be super tight at this point. Just press it on like so. Then take your crank arm bolt, slip that in, and using your 8mm hex key, tighten that up. And tightening this bolt is what's going to press the crank arm back down onto the spindle. You're going to make sure it's nice and snug. You don't need to be Superman here and honk it down until the cows come home. Just make sure that it is nice and tight as you can comfortably get it by hand. I'm still tightening here and it's still pressing on. It's getting more difficult though. Cool beans. Now we're going to stand up, put some weight on it. Using your body weight here will definitely help. Press down like so, and make sure it's good and snug. Like I mentioned earlier, those tapers are what makes sure this doesn't come loose. So there you go. Cool beans, we've reinstalled our cranks. We're almost done, guys. The only step left to do is reinstall a chain. I'm going to use the same chain that's already on it, in the interests of using the same chain that's already on it since it's brand new, because this is a brand new bike. Depending on what kind of chain you're going to install, you will either have, as I mentioned earlier, the link that connects these two, which I already showed you, or the Shimano style where they use a pin right here. Now in order to install this one, you're simply going to size the chain for one thing, which I'll show you how to do in a second, and then once you've cut it, slide that in and then press that link all the way through so it's even on both sides. And once it's even on both sides, you're going to give it's going to be probably stiff after you press it through. Give it a flex, like so, flexing the chain back and forth to loosen it. And make sure the next time you cut the chain, you do not cut it at that link. That's why it is a different color than the other ones. That is only meant to be installed once. So make sure you don't cut the chain anywhere else other than there. Cool beans. So that's how you install some Shimano chain. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to reuse the one that's on it, but I'll show you how to size a chain before we go. So when you buy a new chain, it's going to come with probably 114 to 116 links, somewhere around there, which incidentally are going to be more links than you need. So you're going to go ahead and take the chain, place it on the smallest rear cog, and then thread it through your rear derailleur, which goes over the top of the rear derailleur. I'm hung up on my derailleur here, hang on for a second. Thread it through there like so. Basically thread it through the drivetrain. To get around everywhere where you need to be. There's a little hooky thing here in the front. Make sure you go underneath that and then thread it all the way through and around. I have it on backwards because the pin is not where I want it to be. Take it, lay it over the smallest rear cog, and thread it through. through, down over the rear derailleur, inside that little hooky thing, like so. Making sure it's in the right place or it's going to drag on that, like so. Get it through the back there, down through the back of the rear derailleur, over the rear derailleur pulley. Again, if you're not really comfortable with doing this, I recommend you take it to a bike shop and have a professional do it. Mainly because if you do this wrong, you're going to ruin a perfectly good $40 chain. So there you go. Now to size it, you're going to pull it together like so. And where it meets, this one is pretty much the perfect size as is. But basically, you want to tension it so that when it's on the smallest chain ring and the smallest cog, when you pull it together, you want to tension it. So it would be like this and there'd be some slack in it. You would pull it together until it overlapped by 2 links, and then you're going to break the chain there and install it there. As I mentioned, I'm going to use the ones already on it. When that one wears out, I'll replace it with this spare Shimano chain that I have. So I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall the one that was already on it using the connecting link. So when you buy a new chain, it's going to come with probably 114 to 116 links, somewhere around there, which incidentally are going to be more links than you need. So you're going to go ahead and take the chain, place it on the smallest rear cog, and then thread it through your rear derailleur, which goes over the top of the rear derailleur. I'm hung up on my derailleur here, hang on for a second. Thread through there like so. Basically thread it through the drivetrain to get around everywhere where you need to be. There's a little hooky thing here in the front. Make sure you go underneath that and then thread it all the way through and around. I have it on backwards because the pin is not where I want it to be. Take it, lay it over the smallest rear cog, and thread it through. Thread it through, down over the rear derailleur, inside that little hooky thing, like so. Making sure it's in the right place or it's going to drag on that, like so. Get it through the back there, down through the back of the rear derailleur, over the rear derailleur pulley. Again, if you're not really comfortable with doing this, I recommend you take it to a bike shop and have a professional do it. Mainly because if you do this wrong, you're going to ruin a perfectly good $40 chain. So there you go. Now to size it, you're going to pull it together like so. And where it meets, this one is pretty much the perfect size as is. But basically, you want to tension it so that when it's on the smallest chain ring and the smallest cog, when you pull it together, you want to tension it. So it would be like this and there'd be some slack in it. You would pull it together until it overlapped by 2 links, and then you're going to break the chain there and install it there. As I mentioned, I'm going to use the ones already on it. When that one wears out, I'll replace it with this spare Shimano chain that I have. So I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall the one that was already on it using the connecting link. Cool beans. Since this is basically a brand new chain, I might as well go ahead and use this rather than the other one. Cool beans. Same procedure as before. Thread it all through, over the pulleys and all that kind of stuff, through the rear derailleur. As you pull, make sure that it moves freely through the rear derailleur, taking any loops out of the chain as you go. And then reinstall the connecting link, and you are going to be golden. Cool beans. Usually easier to attach a chain when there's no tension on it either. So lift it off of the bottom bracket, connect it, and then flip it back up onto your chain ring. Put the connecting link in there. Other side of the chain on this side for the connecting link. Slip them together, put some tension on it. It should pop together like so, and we are good to go. That is done. Slip it over the bottom of the chainring teeth there. Loosen the derailleur. Slip it onto the front chainring, and we're done. We are good to go. I will make a separate video on how to set up gears and adjust rear derailleurs and so on and so forth. Some of you asked for that, making separate videos on how to set up gears and so on and so forth. So I'll do that in a separate video. That's going to do it for this one. This one's already long enough. So cool beans. There you go. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to convert your bike from a multi-geared bike to a 1x10 and how to refresh your drivetrain and install new stuff. Cool beans. Thanks for watching. Again, if you have any more suggestions on other videos you'd like to see me do on bikes, leave them in the comment box down below, and I'll certainly look into them and think about doing them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Rock on.